So I'm here today with Ruth Sturkey, former financial planner and owner and founder of The Red House, which was a really successful boutique financial planning business, which has become part of Paradigm Norton. So following a transition period, Ruth is now non-exec director at Paradigm Norton, as well as being very involved in the Institute of Financial Wellbeing, blogger, coach, and who knows what else the future might hold for you, Ruth. Welcome and thank you very much.
Hello, Becca. Thank you very much for inviting me on.
So just for a bit of context, Ruth, you attended one of my courses earlier in the summer, and my courses focus on the power of independent thinking, how we can behave in ways that support our own independent thinking and that of others, and the positive outcomes that can lead to with clients, with colleagues, with friends and family. And after that, I approached Ruth to see if she'd have a chat with me, I guess, about the experience generally, but also with that financial planning hat on and that angle. I'm fascinated to hear your perspective, Ruth, on your learnings in that context. But first of all, I wondered if we might just zoom out a little bit again, and I'd love to know, a few weeks on, what's stuck with you from what the work that we did together.
Well, it was a very intense, enlightening, enjoyable 3 days, and it was a 2+1, wasn't it? And I found the whole thing to be deeply fascinating, in as much as financial planners or coaches, we are told the importance of listening, and some people may even have participated in a kind of coaching course or a listening course where you think you've nailed it, and it's like about maintaining eye contact and doing your best not to speak and not getting distracted and all of those good things. And I've kind of understood those things for a number of years, and I guess thinking back to sales training as well, there's a whole thing around, you ask a question, and whoever, or make a statement, and whoever speaks first has made the sale. And so at times one can get quite good at just going, yeah, this is feeling uncomfortable, I'm going to stay quiet. But there's an intended outcome in mind. And what I found really different about working with you, Becca, was the kind of almost the open-endedness of the silence that we, as the thinking partner in your context, and to use your language, that when we ask a question of the thinker, the person that's there to think, it's genuinely with no agenda in mind. It's genuinely not because we're itching to tell them what they should do. It's not because we need to close a deal, or specifically get out of that client some specific goals or objectives. This is genuinely about enabling that person to think about whatever it is on their mind. And observing my colleagues who are on the course with me, it was absolutely fascinating to watch another human being think and go through the process of thinking. And you'd given us a little bit of background about this idea that people think in waves. And to actually see that come to life was a really, I don't know, quite an extraordinary thing to watch, because that concept of thinking in waves, and as much as you ask a question, I go, then I come out with my answer, and then I might just go, Normally somebody interrupts at that kind of pause, because we think that person's done. But to just leave somebody to just be was just, it was like, I'm almost like in danger of using too many superlatives, I think, here, but it was incredibly powerful to watch it. And you go through a little bit of a phase where it feels a little bit weird, a bit uncomfortable, but then you realize that it is genuinely a gift to the person who's been allowed to think without interruption. So that really has stuck with me. And I've had a couple of incidences after the course, or indeed during the course, when I just practice it, like literally talking to somebody at drinks, and I just thought, I'm just not going to say anything without seeming like a weirdo. And I actually got a message back from the person I was speaking to. I really enjoyed talking to you the other night, Ruth, which really made me smile to myself because it was great practice for me. So those are the things that come to mind. And then there's the various techniques that you teach us by showing us, by enabling or identifying those aspects that come up within the work we're doing. So it was incredibly practical. And also what you also did, which I think is very brave in as somebody leading a course, is you didn't try to manufacture outcomes or plant things. You just let them evolve, and by your own submission, therefore sometimes some bits are left hanging, but that's okay because that's life. So yeah, it's nice to be able to reflect on it, actually. As you say, it's probably getting on for almost 2 months since I did the course. So yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. Oh, it's lovely to hear all that. It's really nice to hear your reflections. So I guess now, putting that financial planning hat back on for a moment, I wonder what you see, what your thoughts are as to how this work and this way of being with other people can support financial planners in their work with their clients.
Yeah, I made reference, obviously, to my kind of previous way of working to some extent, and I what I think the thinking environment brings to financial planners is another methodology, another model, another tool that can be incredibly powerful when used at the right time. So, for instance, there will be times when it is appropriate to ask questions because you're specifically looking for answers. But very often, I think it's super important in our role as financial planners, bearing in mind that we're trying to balance two tensions, if we're being honest. One is around, particularly at the start of a relationship, securing that client for the firm, for the financial planner as an individual, whatever that may happen to be. But at the same token, really making sure that what we follow with the client is their agenda, and it's not some predetermined agenda that we've decided is correct. So we can all, I think, as financial planners, make assumptions when somebody walks into a room about what's good for that person, what they need, and whilst they're talking, you're already thinking, oh yeah, I can see what's needed here. Cash flow, some investment, a decent investment strategy, a few tax wrappers, jobs are good. And those are the things that you might implement. But the most important thing in the first instance is to really understand what is important to the client and give them time and space to think. Because most people have rarely had time and space to just think. And I genuinely think that done in the right way, with the client having an understanding that you're giving them some time and space to think, that to ask an open-ended question and just let the client talk, kind of manage your agenda in a very subtle way, or indeed put the agenda to one side, is an incredibly powerful thing. And I think most clients that walk in will be impressed and think that they've had an amazing conversation with you, even if you have actually said very little. So I think it's a real two-way win, in as much as both parties get something very special out of it. The potential client or the client gets an opportunity to consider things that they've maybe never allocated time for, but also for the financial planner, you're going to understand things about that person that you would never have got to if you hadn't given them the time to properly think about what it is that they want to do or what they want to think about or achieve from the relationship with you.
Mm. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? I find it amazes me how often when I've listened to somebody in this way, they will subsequently refer to the conversation that we had last week.
Yeah.
And I really didn't say anything. I really
Yeah.
didn't say a lot, and just enabled them to have that time. So I think there's something really special about that, and we just don't get the opportunity to think in that way in most places in our lives, I don't think. So I think it's quite a massive added value, actually, that financial planners could be adding.
Yeah.
To give their clients the real opportunity. We had myself and my partner just engaged with a financial planner who's also done one of my courses, and we had a really interesting conversation with her. And again, she really let us think. And I think from the other side of the fence, it really allowed us to come to some conclusions of our own, which actually have meant that the conversations continued beyond the meeting, and we've taken actions we might not have otherwise taken. So yeah, I think there's something about giving the client more agency over the outcomes as well, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you reminded me of an experience of me talking with husband and wife, I think it was, and you know, enabling that identification that they weren't actually on the same page by allowing them to think about things, and you know, providing that environment. You talk about, you know, creating a generative listening environment, I think, if I've remembered that, or generative thinking environment. And you know, you also want to enable the couple to actually hear each other within that dialogue. And you know, it's kind of the thought that's going through my mind as well is very often within a, you know, particularly husband and wife, there can be one dominant partner, and to kind of create the environment where the less dominant partner can perhaps have a say as well is like vital. Yeah, it's you know, it can be, well, it can lead to different outcomes, and you know, but I think in terms of it's important to allow people to have this exploration. So it's a gift.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't agree more. So are there any I guess, are there any challenges that you perhaps have experienced yourself, or that you see other financial planners experiencing with their clients in terms of dynamics, or dynamics within meetings, or anything else really? Any challenges that you see coming up that you think this work could help with?
I think the job of a financial planner can be challenging in itself, and the reason I say that is the financial planner has to balance building a relationship, really listening deeply and understanding a client and what their preferred outcomes are, where they want to get to. Balanced alongside, there are certain regulatory things that need to be done. There are certain things that need to be covered within an annual planning meeting, for instance, which are important from the nuts and bolts of a financial planning / advisory relationship. So I think there is a challenge if you've got an hour and a half, or you know, if you're lucky, 2 hours with a client that you maybe only see once or twice a year. There's a lot to get through, and I think many financial planners will approach a meeting with an agenda as long as your arm, and they want to gallop through it. And I guess in this context, I'm talking about an ongoing relationship where this is still extremely helpful, as well as an initial meeting. The initial meeting may be a little bit more flexible if genuinely the financial planner is there to explore with the client what it is that they're looking to do. I do still think a lot of people are itching to get into the presentation and the sale and the close. No problem with that. Like, you know, don't get me wrong. We are commercial. We work in the commercial sector, so we ultimately have to be, generating new clients and closing deals, or whatever that might happen to look like. And so I think the challenge that you ask about is, how do you get all of this into a meeting, and how can you make all of this leave space to ask better questions and listen better and enable clients to think? I think that is a challenge, but I think to think that, well, let's just squeeze out the bit around enabling the client to think and the financial planner to listen, and really work out and at times counter assumptions that clients are making. If we don't do that, we can have the best presentation, talk about the technical stuff, talk about amazing investment strategies and what's going on with the tax wrappers and how much tax you're saving, but you're really not going to shift the client to where you'd like to get them to. And so many of the assumptions that we all carry around, the classic with clients is, I'm no good with money. And I don't know, I guess some of us might think, oh, that's brilliant, don't worry, you've got me to help. Well, maybe it would be better if actually we tried to uncover what that assumption was, to try to dispel and build confidence, to enable the client to actually engage more clearly in the conversation that we're actually having. So as I'm talking, I'm thinking there's a couple of things here around enabling the client to really understand what they want to do, but enabling the client to articulate what are their real concerns and limiting assumptions that exist around money, or indeed money blockers. Very often a client will feel they're not, that they have money that maybe they're not worthy of, or they feel guilt around. Or you may have people that spend an awful lot of money, even if they earn a lot of money, and therefore they're still not making progress with the plan. And I think it's trying to identify some of these things by listening very acutely and very carefully to our clients, that we can then very carefully, using the techniques that you teach, help us deconstruct those issues that will get in the way of the client having a good outcome. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. I guess there's the phrase that's coming to mind is sort of slowing down to speed up, almost. Doing things once, doing them right. And again, it just brings, just from a client perspective, I suppose, just bringing it back to the experience that we had. We left, it was interesting, we left the first meeting with that same planner, and we hadn't talked about the mortgage. We hadn't talked about the potential of repaying mortgage, and kind of addressing that, whether we did that or whether we invested some money that we had. And it was really interesting that when we really opened that up, and I asked her if we could, can we explore this a bit? Because I would not have invested money. I don't think I wouldn't have chosen to take that step unless we'd explored actually some stuff that I was definitely assuming, that hang-ups that I had, all sorts of things about security and money and the home, and all of that sort of stuff. We needed to explore that in order to be able to take that next step. So and I do hear of, and anecdotally, I guess, of perhaps conversion rates not being as high as some planners might like them to be, and I think often that's the case. If we've not explored what might be stopping or getting in the way of a client taking action, then they're not going to take the action ultimately. So
yeah, I mean, and I think another classic is, and again, relating back to my time as a financial planner, you can have what you think is an amazing first client meeting, and you're pretty sure that the client is going to proceed, but for some reason they're not. And that's really important, to really try to uncover what that is. And I think unless we've identified that in the meeting, I mean, I recall we used to ask clients to complete pretty detailed expenditure questionnaires. Some people love doing that, very happy to do it, not a problem. Other people, I used to think, God, they're just really disorganized or a bit belligerent, or, well, why on earth are they not giving me this information? Not understanding at all. It could be that they're time poor and they just can't be bothered. But I think for a lot of people, actually having a look at something as personal as your spending means having to address things that can be quite uncomfortable. And so unless we understand that, the client's just not going to send that back, and we're not going to actually move forward. So I think there's a whole heap of reasons why us not really understanding what's going on for our client prohibits them taking action. So I think it's when I reflect on what I've learned from doing some behavioral finance courses and your course, I just kind of think, God, I could have done it so much better. But it's always easy to look back, isn't it, rather than necessarily have known it at the time. But I think a lot of this is new information that, as we kind of evolve what the financial planning industry looks like, and we become more enabled via technology on aspects of the job that have otherwise distracted us. So, for instance, note taking. I used to write reams of notes. So did my colleagues who were sometimes supporting me in meetings. Amazingly, we now have technology that can write the notes for us, or take the notes for us, and then give us amazing summaries. So that really enables these in-depth conversations to happen with clients. And I think that's a really exciting step forward for us as a profession.
Oh, definitely. I think there's a lot. Well, there's a lot of talk about tech and the time it can save at the moment, isn't there? And I guess I have a big question, like, what do we do with that time? Let's not kind of make it just almost like expenditure creep, as we earn more and more, we just spend more and more. Like, what can we do with that time to make the experience more valuable for our clients, perhaps to serve clients we couldn't previously afford to serve. I think there's loads of opportunities. Anyway, so obviously you've done various training programs and behavioral finance work in the latter stages of your career as a financial planner, and are super experienced. I mean, I'm certain that your clients were very lucky to work with you, Ruth, from what I know about you. I guess some things have just moved and evolved, and other things we learn through experience. I wonder if there's anything that you've learned in recent years, and I guess ideally in reference to the work that we've done together, but more broadly as well. Is there anything that you've learned that you wish you'd known earlier in your career, sort of as you were starting out?
Oh God, so many things. But I think it is around the primacy of the relationship that you develop with the client. I remember when I was a young financial planner, I thought it was incredibly important to be technically incredibly sharp. So I got myself to that point. And don't get me wrong, it is important. What we provide for our clients, we need to know our onions for sure. But it isn't for us to regurgitate all of that information in front of a client and look like super clever or power-based with knowledge, which again happens and I see happen. It is to be able to communicate in a really clear way with a client, to build trust, to build a relationship, to enable them to feel listened to really understand that person. And I think what I learned with you was just an additional methodology or significance, and it brought to my mind the significance of just allowing clients to just be and talk. And I'd like to think that I had done that in client relationships, but in truth, I probably could have done it better. And so I think what you're able to offer is something that will take client relationships to a different level. If people engage with it and are willing to allow their mind to be expanded. But I think it's I was asked to comment recently for an article for one of the trade publications around, and it kind of, what's all this about financial planners being therapists, was the thrust of the article. And I'm very quick to close down that type of comment, because of course we're not therapists, we're not pretending to be therapists, that's not our job. But it is our job, if we are helping clients with something as complex as managing their money, which is an incredibly complex thing for a lot of human beings to do, as part of ensuring that person uses that money to have a life of meaning and purpose and well-being, it's really important for us to actually understand the responsibility of what it is that we're doing, which goes below the knowledge of the technical stuff. And I think, without doubt, what we're talking about in terms of using coaching and listening and thinking techniques, this is the next wave or the next evolution of financial planning, as our time gets freed up to spend it on higher value areas. And so I think it's, I think maybe I got away when I was practicing as a financial planner with my, what I call 2.0 version of financial planning. But I actually quite seriously think that the better firms will be equipping their financial planners to be fully fledged in the skills that a financial planner 3.0 is going to need. And by 3.0, what I mean is coaching and listening skills and being cognizant of behavioral finance, why we behave like we do as a human being. And anything that we can do to get that knowledge and actually bring it into our practice, I think, is only going to be beneficial for the future of the individual and for the firms.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think another aspect that does occur to me for younger financial planners is building empathy. I think there's a bit of a misnomer that kind of goes around that if you're 29 and you haven't had the life experience yet, then you can't possibly work with clients who are approaching retirement. You just can't understand where they're at. And I guess what I see, and I think what was reflected in the blog that you wrote actually after we worked together, was how much empathy develops through this process of listening. But actually, more to the point, people feel that somebody is empathizing with them through feeling really genuinely heard.
Yeah.
And listening for longer enables that. And I think if we can listen for longer, we're going to understand somebody's perspective that much better. So we're going to be able to, relate it to something that, won't look exactly the same in our lives, but something that invokes a similar feeling, perhaps. So I do wonder if there's something around that as well, just supporting, because you don't, of course, you can't gain that life experience in, the next 2 years or 5 years or whatever. But I think we can learn to be with people in a way that displays empathy that perhaps people don't learn and don't know how to teach.
I think the word that you said there that really landed for me was genuinely listening, because there's a lot of performative listening. So people are told to listen. It's sales training, ABC is to ask a question and shut up and listen for the answer. But what happens a lot of the time is we know the answer we want to get, we want to hear, or we're waiting for the objection so we can handle it. That's very different to genuinely listening. And I think that's a real difference between what you teach, Becca, and what most people think is listening. And it becomes obvious. It becomes obvious because that person is, as they're listening, is fully engaged within that. The person in front of you will have no doubt that you were listening. The amount of times, I'm sure it happens to everybody on Zoom calls these days, but you talk to someone and their eyes flick off because something's popped in, or the doorbell's rung, or they're looking down at their agenda about what do I need to do next. We see all that as a human being, and it kind of is it can erode the moment or the trust or the empathy that's being built. So it is a real discipline to just be with that person, even if it's through a screen. And I think also to feel what it's like coming back the other way. When somebody's really just, and that's one of the great things that you do, is it's all about practice. and it's not role play, there's no need for people to get worried about that. It's genuine practice, and it's a very special experience to know that the person on the other side of the desk or the screen is genuinely listening in to what you've got to say, without interruption, without taking you off in the wrong direction, without bringing their assumptions about what they think you're trying to say or trying to come with a clever answer. That's very rarely does that happen in life.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we're sort of sticking with the topic of the next generation of financial planners and their training and development and so on. I guess something I'm just really interested in your take on this. I'm working with more and more financial planning businesses and hearing quite a familiar story, I suppose, is starting to emerge, that there's a lot wanting to move their businesses on, needing, I guess, founders or the more senior members of a financial planning team, perhaps, really wanting to be able to spend more time on the business rather than in the business. They've got too many clients. They want to, bring that next generation on. And there's lots of places they can go. They can send them for, technical training, the next gen courses, and lots of other ways they can get through exams. But the typical approach to learning, I guess what we used to call soft skills, or I would more call human skills, essential human skills, is a kind of come into my meeting, watch me, copy me, do it like me. And there's not really a lot of time, and possibly not the training skill either, just don't know how to teach that stuff. And there certainly isn't the time to be spending kind of deliberately with people. Is that something that you see? Is that something that is a sort of familiar story to you?
The kind of lack of time that kind of founders, leaders of businesses have in order to pass on their skills.
Yeah, and develop that next generation's skills with people, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, in my mind, I think there's a two-pronged attack. I think I learned masses from having mentors and attending meetings, listening, observing, watching client reactions, probably taking the notes as it would have been in those days, and seeing how my I'm trying to think, my senior, I can't think what the right word would be, just dealt with things. That's invaluable. But what's not quite so good about it is most of us then think, oh, I've got to be like XYZ. So we start to pick up on behaviors, phrases, ways of being that aren't natural to ourselves. And I very much remember all of a sudden my job became far easier when I realized it was best to be me rather than try to emulate one of my previous bosses or mentors. And so without doubt, I think going into some meetings and meeting clients in a supported environment where you're the supporting advisor is priceless. At the same token, no individual mentor is going to know the answers to everything or be the expert on all situations, which is then when it becomes invaluable to actually have some kind of independent training, I think. And for a course such as the thinking environment to actually build on the skills that are being observed. You may also be observing skills that are suboptimal. So again, the canny up and coming financial planner has to discern, oh, that's great, I do that, but maybe that wasn't so good, or you interrupted and I don't think that's a good thing to do. So I think it's a combination of, at the coalface, watching people that have been doing it that you may be taking clients on from is important, and also getting to know the clients, but also then developing your own way. And I think the key thing is when a relationship changes from the current advisor to a new advisor or a new planner, is you have to be your own person. Otherwise, the client will feel it. You know, I remember that experience of being an advisor that takes over from the lead advisor and thinking, oh crumbs, I'm not Gareth. In my case, was my late business partner, and on a number of occasions I had to step into his client meetings. I was never going to be him. There was no point me trying to pretend I could be him. But if I have got raw skills, the basic skills that enable me to manage a client relationship, overlaid with the individual's own personality, then you're onto something. And so I think you can be a course like yours can be incredibly supportive to the work that should be going on within a firm anyway, but also take away some of the heavy lifting for the time poor founder, business leader, whatever.
I'm glad you said that. That's what I'm hoping. That's really what I'm hoping.
Yeah, I think so.
I think there's something in the independent thinking part of it as well, because as you say, you don't want to be producing a carbon copy of you in the next generation of financial planner. That is never going to be authentic. And really what you want them, and you don't want them to have to come to you every time they have a new issue with a client that they haven't come across before. You really want to develop those independent thinking skills as well. So yeah, I think there's something in that. And I guess actually that brings me on to just something else I'd love to ask you about, which is the succession of leadership within businesses, which, you know, with the average age of financial planners being mid-50s or something, it's a big topic, isn't it? And, you know, lots of people wanting not to sell their businesses necessarily, but to be part of, make sure that the very best happens for their clients, and lots of people bringing on the next generation of leaders within their businesses as well. And I'm assuming as well in your new life, I guess, post financial planning, that you're working with business leaders who are tackling some of this stuff. Yeah. What are some of the challenges that you see those leaders facing as they come towards that succession and try to hand on the baton of leadership within their firms to the next generation?
What I observe is business owners getting to a point where they are, as you say, they're thinking about their own succession. And succession, when you're a business owner, particularly in within the financial planning world, it's not a short process. And so what I observe is the forward-thinking business owner is starting to think in advance of when they might actually want to step back, about what their options are that sit with them. And of course, the options are, you know, it tends to be a sale or an MBO or a wind up, a management buyout or a wind up. Most people don't wind their businesses up, so it's one of the other two options. On the sale front, what I'm observing is that there is a lot of consolidator activity or aggregator activity, and that may not be every business owner's desired outcome for the business that they have grown and built with love over the years. And so it's then thinking, okay, well, what are my choices for smaller, maybe more independently owned businesses? And that's tricky for the reason you've just identified, because a lot of them are of a similar age to the people who are looking to get out. So I think it's the idea of thinking, do I have people in my firm that might be able to take my business over? It could be an incredible opportunity for both the next generation and for the retiring generation. And it's about having conversations and using, you know, you hear people say things like, God, if only I'd known that you were thinking of selling the business, I would have loved to have had the opportunity to take your business over. Or vice versa, the founder, the owner going, I had no idea that they would be interested in taking over the business, because we're each making assumptions about what's going on in each other's lives. So I think the better conversations that we can have between the generations over time is going to lead to much better outcomes. And I hadn't really thought about using the kind of work that you do, Becca, in this context, but I think it could be incredibly powerful because it enables both parties to be able to voice what it is that they're thinking and to explore whether there's any possibility of something such as an MBO actually happening. Is that the kind of context of what you were thinking and what you're observing?
Yeah, I guess at that stage for sure, and also a bit further down the line when there is an identified successor, I think. Right. I guess of the experience that I had within the firm, that we did go through an MBO, and I think this is common to other businesses that I'm seeing going through similar. That a lot of assumptions get made about, especially so many family businesses in financial planning. It blows my mind actually how many I come across, but especially when you've got any kind of family dynamic involved. The perhaps the parent or the older generation really wants to do best by the younger generation. The younger generation wants to do best by the older generation, but actually they're making loads of assumptions about what best looks like, and what, not necessarily, protecting each other from what might be worries or fears or anxieties and that kind of thing. And I guess I could just see massive benefit in more open, honest conversations where people aren't taking so much responsibility for each other's emotions, I guess, through the process, and really sharing, this is what I need from you in order to succeed. So yeah, I guess that's where I'm thinking it could be really helpful.
And would that be kind of facilitating the conversations with both parties either side of the table? Is that what you're thinking, or would it be working with the individual parties separately and then bringing them together? How have you seen that work best?
Yeah, I'm not sure how this will evolve. I mean, to date, I've tended to work with the whole team or with individuals. There's a program I'm running next year which is around mentorship, which I'm hoping kind of takes this a stage further. But I think there's something to be said for facilitated conversations as well, and more, really taking the time, as I say, slowing down to speed up. Addressing all of those concerns at a much earlier stage and having those open conversations. So yeah, it's watch this space a little bit, Ruth.
Yeah.
But I definitely think there's
I can see many applications. A question I got for you, actually, thinking about your work with financial planners, which I think is really valuable. Are the skills that you're teaching to enable the financial planner to build better relationships with the clients, or is it to enable the financial planner to actually think better for themselves?
I think it's both, and absolutely. Absolutely. Because
I
mean, how often do most people take time to really think for themselves? Not many people that I know carve out deliberate time in their diary every week or even every month to think really well, especially not to think well with another person supporting them. And I think as we're at any stage in our lives, really, it's a classic thinking environment. So that a classic line that I will use in my training will be, the quality of everything we do depends on the quality of the thinking that we do first. And so I think the better we can support ourselves to think well and be able to think through new situations that might arise, the better our actions will be ultimately.
Well, yeah, I think then, I think I'd been thinking about your financial planners, working with financial planners as enabling them in their job. But that, actually, you're absolutely right. The greater value comes from that individual learning to think better for themselves. And then it sprays off in so many different directions, doesn't it? Whether that is within the career, whether it's in personal relationships, family relationships, friendships, whatever that may happen to be. And it's very much supporting somebody within their career, whatever trajectory that's going to make. So I think it's incredibly powerful.
I hope so.
I wish things like that were available when I was when I was the next generation.
Yeah, definitely. So just before we wrap up, Ruth, I just a quick final question. Well, maybe I've got two more questions, but just one more that I'd love to know. So you know a bit about me now. You've known me a while, and perhaps this leads on from what you just said, actually. And you know how I talk about what I do. Do you think there's anything I'm missing? Do you think there's anything that I could highlight more in terms of how I talk about the work that I'm doing that is interesting to you that I could maybe bring more attention to?
That is so. I think that is interesting because your work is best experienced, and you know that, I now know that, and I said, actually just made me think, as financial planners, we have a new client come in, and we know we can't give them the fully finished 30-year plan on day one. So there has to be an element of trust that, we are the people to work with, just wait and see. And I feel there's a simile of that with you, in as much as it can be life-changing for people to experience this. And even if it's not life-changing, because that's an incredibly lofty statement, it can be super helpful in many aspects of an individual's life, and provide a new skill set, a new tool, whatever the right analogy is. And they have to trust you in the same way as we're expecting a client to trust us. And that's the difficulty in the kind of wonderful magic that you weave, is it has to be experienced in order for people to really truly believe it. So I think that is an issue, but heck, it's an issue for us all within the financial planning sector. But I also think, and this is the thing that also is a compliment to you, really, is you're very modest, and you're not going to be giving it jazz hands and singing this from the rooftop. So unless you have an entire personality change, what people need to know is that, Becca is the person to lead them through this process. And, you've got now a host of people that have worked with you that have seen this, that I believe to be trusted people within our sector. And when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about the likes of Brett Davidson, who, like, wow, I'm a Brett fan as well. And if Brett says something, I tend to believe him. It's a slow process. So I think my message would just be just kind of believe in this. And it's very interesting when you start to talk to people in the coaching profession, how many people have heard about the thinking environment type of work, and also believe it to have this kind of sprinkling of wonder that comes with it, which may sound a bit woo, and I'm meaning it to, but it genuinely can make a difference.
Thank you. So, final question, I promise this is the last one. Is there anything else that you wish I'd asked you?
Is there anything else? I don't think so. I think you have. I'm delighted to be prompted to remember all of the amazing things that I experienced and learned with my time with you, and I think we've covered it quite well. I don't think it would be helpful to do a dive into the process, but it's a very iterative kind of model, I think. Not that, yeah. So you asked me, was there any questions that I thought you could have asked me that you haven't asked? And no, the answer is no, not. It's been great. It's nice to talk to you.
Fantastic. Yeah, lovely to talk to you, Ruth. Thank you so much for your time. I so appreciate your passion and dedication to everything you do. I just think you bring such a huge warm energy to every part of your life and work. It's been a real pleasure talking to you this afternoon.
Thank you. That's really nice of you to say. Thanks, Becca.
Thank you.